I'm Megan Wilson, 32, a single mom from Boston. I never thought I'd have to choose between my family and my daughter's health. Harper, my 12-year-old, is a piano prodigy with a rare autoimmune condition requiring daily medication. One day, my sister Rebecca's betrayal changed everything. The prestigious recital that would have transformed Harper's life instead became a nightmare that tore our family apart. Before I tell you how my own sister betrayed my daughter, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to hear the full story. Growing up with Rebecca wasn't easy. Being 3 years older, she always set the bar impossibly high. Our parents, especially our mother Eleanor, made it clear that Rebecca's academic achievements were the gold standard in our household. My father Richard, though loving in his own way, was often too busy working to intervene when Mom compared us. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. When Rebecca graduated as valedictorian, got accepted to Harvard, and eventually became a successful corporate attorney, I felt like I was living in her shadow. I took a different path. I married Brian right after community college when I was barely 20. Rebecca didn't hide her disappointment, telling me I was settling and throwing away my potential. Mom agreed with her, of course. When I got pregnant with Harper soon after, Rebecca acted like I'd made some terrible mistake. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked with that concerned tone that wasn't concern at all. Even as I glowed with happiness about my baby, my sister managed to make me question myself. Brian was a good man initially, but he wasn't prepared for fatherhood. We struggled financially, and the pressure of parenthood exposed cracks in our relationship. When Harper was 5, Brian announced he'd met someone else. The divorce was messy, leaving me to raise Harper mostly on my own. Brian paid child support, but his visits became increasingly sporadic. Meanwhile, Rebecca's life looked perfect from the outside. She married Derek, a successful surgeon, and they had 2 children, Lily and Mason, both high achievers like their parents. Their family photos looked like they belonged in a magazine. Their house in Brookline was something I could only dream of affording. My mother Eleanor maintained relationships with both of us, but the difference in her treatment was obvious. She'd drop everything to babysit Rebecca's kids, but would make excuses when I needed help with Harper. She remembered Lily and Mason's academic achievements, but seemed to forget Harper's recitals. Everything changed when Harper was 6. I noticed how she gravitated toward the old piano at my friend Stephanie's house. She sat down and within minutes was picking out melodies she'd heard. Stephanie, who taught music at an elementary school, pulled me aside and said, "Megan, your daughter has a gift." We couldn't afford a piano, so I found a used keyboard at a garage sale. Harper was obsessed. She played for hours, teaching herself songs from YouTube tutorials. Her natural talent was undeniable. When Stephanie helped us find an affordable piano teacher, Ms. Abigail, Harper blossomed even further. Music became Harper's identity. When she played, she transformed from a shy, uncertain girl into someone confident and radiant. For the first time, I had something Rebecca couldn't touch, a genuinely gifted daughter who found her passion early. Then came the diagnosis. At 8, Harper started experiencing unusual symptoms, extreme fatigue, unexplained fevers, joint pain. After months of tests, the specialist Dr. Patterson delivered the news. Harper had a rare autoimmune condition. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but required daily medication to prevent serious complications. The medication was expensive, and our insurance only covered part of it. I took a second job waiting tables on weekends to make ends meet. Between Harper's medical appointments, piano lessons, and my work schedule, I was exhausted, but determined to support my daughter's health and passion. As Harper's talent grew, so did the recognition. She won local competitions, was featured in the community newspaper, and was invited to play at school events. My mother couldn't ignore Harper's accomplishments anymore, but her acknowledgement always came with qualifiers. "She's certainly good for her age," or It's nice she has something to focus on with her condition. Rebecca's reaction was more concerning. At family gatherings, I noticed how she'd tense up when people praised Harper. She'd quickly redirect conversations to Lily's debate team victories or Mason's science fair projects. When Harper was invited to play at a cousin's wedding, Rebecca suggested it might overwhelm her and offered Lily to sing instead. The tension escalated over the past year. Rebecca started making comments about Harper being too confident and suggesting that talent without academic discipline was wasted potential. She'd ask Harper pointed questions about her grades, knowing that between her health issues and music practice, school sometimes took a back seat. Despite the challenges, I was Harper's fierce advocate. I drove 2 hours every Saturday for her lessons with Ms. Julia, a renowned piano teacher who agreed to take Harper on at a reduced rate because of her exceptional talent. I arranged my work schedule around her practice time. I learned about her medication, became an expert on her condition, and packed her pill organizer meticulously each week. What I didn't realize was how deeply Rebecca's resentment had grown, or how far she would go to put Harper in her place. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I still remember the embossed letterhead, Berklee College of Music Young Artists Showcase. Harper's piano teacher, Ms. Julia, had submitted a recording of Harper's performance of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major without telling us. The prestigious showcase featured the most talented young musicians in New England, with scholarship opportunities and mentorships available for standout performers. When I showed Harper the letter, her hazel eyes widened with a mixture of excitement and terror. "Mom, this is huge," she whispered. "The Berklee Showcase is it's where real musicians perform." Miss Julia was ecstatic. "This could change everything for Harper," she told me during our next lesson. College scouts attend this event. Summer program directors. The networking opportunities alone are invaluable. She immediately increased Harper's lessons to twice weekly, refusing additional payment when I protested that we couldn't afford it. For the next 3 months, Harper practiced with a determination I'd never seen before. She'd wake up early to play before school. She'd rush through homework to get back to the piano. The piece she selected, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, was ambitious for a 12-year-old, but Ms. Julia believed she could master it. "This piece will showcase her technical ability and emotional depth," Ms. Julia explained. "It's challenging but not impossible. Harper has the hands and the heart for it." As the recital approached, Harper's confidence grew. Her medication was stabilized, and although she still had occasional flare-ups of fatigue, she was managing her condition well. The routine we'd established, medication with breakfast and dinner, extra rest on lesson days, seemed to be working. Then came the family dinner, 3 weeks before the recital. I hadn't planned to mention the showcase, knowing how Rebecca might react, but Harper was too excited to contain herself. "Aunt Rebecca, I'm playing at the Berklee Young Artists Showcase next month," she announced as we gathered around my mother's dining table. Rebecca's smile tightened. "Berklee? Isn't that a college? Seems a bit advanced for middle school, doesn't it?" "It's a special program for young musicians," I explained, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Harper was selected based on her audition recording." "Well, isn't that something?" my mother Eleanor said, her tone not quite reaching enthusiasm. "Of course, Lily just won first place in the state mathematics Olympiad. Different talents, I suppose." Harper's smile dimmed slightly, but she pressed on. "Ms. Julia says if I do well, I might be considered for their summer intensive program." "Summer programs look good on college applications," Rebecca conceded. "Though I do wonder if you're stretching yourself too thin with your condition." The way she said condition made it sound like an excuse rather than a serious medical issue. I felt my temper flaring but kept it in check for Harper's sake. "Her doctor says musical activity is actually beneficial," I countered. "It helps with stress management, which can reduce flare-ups." Rebecca nodded in that patronizing way of hers. "I'm just concerned about balance. Harper seems very confident about her abilities. Sometimes children need to learn humility before they enter the real world. She's worked incredibly hard, I said, feeling defensive. She deserves to be confident. There's confident, and then there's overconfident, Rebecca replied. Derek and I are careful not to overly praise Lily and Mason. We don't want them developing an inflated sense of self. The conversation devolved from there. Rebecca critiqued my parenting style, suggesting I was setting Harper up for disappointment by making her think she's special. My mother nodded along, occasionally adding that Megan always did need more structure. By dessert, I was seething. Harper had gone quiet, pushing her cake around the plate instead of eating it. I just think my mother said as we prepared to leave, that children need to learn that life isn't always fair. A little humility goes a long way. Rebecca nodded emphatically. Exactly, Mom. That's exactly what I've been saying. On the drive home, Harper asked in a small voice, "Am I overconfident, Mom?" My heart broke. No, sweetheart. You're talented and hardworking, and it's okay to be proud of that. Aunt Rebecca and Grandma, they just have different ideas about these things. The week before the recital was intense. Harper practiced for hours each day, occasionally to the point of exhaustion. I became concerned about her health and reminded her to pace herself. I have to get it perfect, Mom, she insisted. I have to show them I deserve to be there. The night before the recital, I organized everything meticulously. Harper's medication was sorted into her pill case. The morning dose she would take at home, and the evening dose she would take after the performance. Her navy blue recital dress was pressed and hanging on her closet door. Her sheet music was organized in her folder. As I checked on her before bed, I found her not practicing but sitting quietly at the piano, eyes closed, fingers moving slightly above the keys. Mental practice, she explained when she noticed me watching. Ms. Julia says it's just as important as physical practice. You're going to be amazing tomorrow, I told her, kissing the top of her head. I'm so proud of you no matter what happens. I had no idea that within 24 hours, our lives would be irreversibly changed. Not by Harper's performance, but by my sister's unforgivable betrayal. The morning of the recital dawned bright and clear. Harper woke up early, too nervous to sleep. I made her favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes, and watched carefully as she took her morning medication with a glass of orange juice. She seemed fine, perhaps a bit jittery with anticipation, but nothing concerning. How are you feeling, sweetie? I asked as she picked at her pancakes. Nervous, but good, she replied. No flare-up symptoms, if that's what you're asking. We arrived at the Berkeley Performance Center in Boston 2 hours before the showcase was scheduled to begin. The building was impressive, all glass and sleek modern lines. Harper clutched her music folder to her chest as we entered, her eyes wide as she took in the professional environment. Several other young musicians were already there with their parents, some practicing in corners, others sitting quietly with headphones. Miss Julia met us in the lobby, elegant in a black pantsuit. There's my star, she said, giving Harper a warm hug. Are you ready to show them what you've got? Harper nodded, though I could see the nervousness in her tight smile. Miss Julia led us backstage to the practice rooms where Harper could warm up before the performance. We'd been there about 30 minutes when I spotted Rebecca, Derek, and their children entering the backstage area. My heart sank. I hadn't told them which performance hall the recital would be in, deliberately keeping details vague. Surprise! Rebecca called out, waving as they approached. We wouldn't miss Harper's big day. My mother Eleanor followed behind them, dressed formally as if attending a society event rather than a student recital. The traffic was dreadful, she complained by way of greeting. Harper looked up from the practice piano, her expression a mixture of surprise and anxiety. Hi, Grandma, Aunt Rebecca. You look pale, dear, my mother said immediately. Are you getting enough rest with all this piano business? She's fine, Mom, I interjected, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. Just pre-performance nerves. Rebecca moved closer to Harper, examining her critically. That dress is very plain, isn't it? I brought some jewelry that might dress it up a bit. She opened her purse, pulling out a gaudy necklace that would have been completely inappropriate for a 12-year-old. No thanks, Aunt Rebecca, Harper said politely. Miss Julia says we should keep accessories minimal so they don't distract from the music. Rebecca's lips tightened, but she put the necklace away. Well, I suppose your teacher knows best. Miss Julia appeared at that moment, clipboard in hand. Harper, you'll be performing fourth after the intermission. That gives you about an hour and a half. She nodded politely to my family members before continuing. Megan, could I speak with you briefly about the photography policy? Grateful for the excuse to step away, I followed Miss Julia into the hallway. She didn't actually need to discuss photography. She wanted to tell me about a Juilliard pre-college program representative who was attending the showcase specifically to hear Harper. This could be a game changer, she whispered excitedly. Just don't mention it to Harper yet. No need to add pressure. Our conversation took perhaps 10 minutes. When I returned to the practice room, Rebecca was sitting beside Harper at the piano, making a show of being interested in the music. Where's your medication, honey? I asked, suddenly remembering Harper would need her evening dose after performing. In my backpack, Harper replied, pointing to the corner where her bag sat. I'll make sure it's easily accessible for later, I said, moving toward it. I already checked, Rebecca said quickly. Everything's organized in her pill case, just like you always do it. I frowned. You went through her backpack? I was just helping, Rebecca said defensively. Harper asked me to find her lip balm, and I noticed the pill case. Something felt off, but with the recital approaching and Harper's obvious nervousness, I let it go. That decision would haunt me for months afterward. As the showcase began, we took our seats in the auditorium. Harper remained backstage with the other performers. The first 3 young musicians were impressive, a violinist, a cellist, and a classical guitarist. During intermission, I went backstage to check on Harper. She was sitting alone in the practice room, looking distinctly unwell. Her face was pale, and she was massaging her temples. Harper? What's wrong? I asked, immediately concerned. Just a headache, she said, forcing a smile. And my heart feels kind of funny. Like it's racing. Alarm bells rang in my mind. These were symptoms she experienced during medication withdrawal. Did you take anything? Eat anything unusual? No, just breakfast and the snack you packed. I think it's just nerves. I have to go on in 20 minutes. I hesitated, torn between my concern for her health and not wanting to destroy her confidence before the performance. If you start feeling worse, you tell me immediately, okay? Your health comes first. She nodded, returning to the piano to continue her mental preparation. I reluctantly returned to my seat, where Rebecca immediately asked, Is she getting cold feet? She's not feeling great, I admitted. She's having some symptoms. It's just stage fright, my mother dismissed. All performers get it. These aren't stage fright symptoms, I insisted. This is more like when she misses her medication. Which she didn't, Rebecca said firmly. You're being overprotective, Megan. Let her work through her nerves. Before I could respond, the lights dimmed for the second half of the showcase. The MC announced Harper's name, and polite applause filled the hall as my daughter walked onto the stage. Even from a distance, I could see something was wrong. Her gait was slightly unsteady, and when she bowed, the movement seemed stiff. She sat at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and began the Rachmaninoff prelude. The opening bars were perfect, powerful, and confident. For a moment, I thought my concerns were unfounded. Then, about 2 minutes into the piece, Harper faltered. Her right hand missed a chord, something I'd never heard her do in practice. She recovered quickly and continued, but her tempo became erratic. I could see her blinking rapidly, as if trying to clear her vision. 3/4 through the piece, during the most technically demanding section, Harper suddenly stopped playing. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling visibly. The audience stirred uncomfortably. After an agonizing few seconds, she attempted to continue, but the notes were jumbled and wrong. Then, in a moment that will forever be burned into my memory, Harper slumped forward, her forehead hitting the keys with a discordant crash before she slid sideways off the bench and onto the floor. The auditorium erupted in gasps and confused murmurs. I was already running toward the stage, with Miss Julia right behind me. Harper was unconscious when we reached her, her breathing shallow and her pulse racing. "Call 911. I shouted, cradling her head in my lap. "She needs an ambulance." Rebecca and my mother arrived moments later. "What happened?" my mother demanded, as if I had an explanation ready. "She's having a medical emergency," I snapped. "This isn't stage fright, Mom. She probably just fainted from the pressure," Rebecca suggested, her voice oddly calm. "You know how dramatic she can be." I stared at my sister in disbelief. Harper was clearly in serious distress. Her lips were turning slightly blue, and her breathing was becoming more labored. How could Rebecca be so dismissive? The paramedics arrived within minutes, efficiently assessing Harper's condition and loading her onto a stretcher. As they prepared to transport her, one of them asked, "Does she have any medical conditions? Is she on any medications?" "Yes," I said, fighting back tears. "She has an autoimmune condition. She takes daily medication to manage it. She should have taken her dose this morning." "We'll need to know exactly what medication and the dosage," the paramedic said. I pulled Harper's pill case from her backpack and handed it to him. "It's all in here. She takes these white tablets in the morning and evening." The paramedic examined the pill case, frowning. "These look like regular tablets. Are you sure these are prescription medication?" "Of course I'm sure," I insisted. "I fill her pill case myself every week." At the hospital, the situation became even more confusing. After running tests, the emergency doctor, Dr. Williams, pulled me aside. "Ms. Wilson, your daughter's blood work shows almost no trace of her medication in her system. It's as if she hasn't taken it for at least 24 hours, maybe longer." "That's impossible," I insisted. "I watched her take it this morning." "Whatever she took," Dr. Williams said gravely, "it wasn't her prescribed medication." As Harper was stabilized and transferred to a room for overnight observation, the horrible truth began to dawn on me. Someone had tampered with Harper's medication. And given the timing and circumstances, I had a sickening suspicion about who that someone might be. While Harper slept in her hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and in for delivering the medication she should have had in her system, I sat beside her, my mind racing. The doctor's words kept repeating, whatever she took, it wasn't her prescribed medication. I examined the pill case I'd brought to the hospital. The pills inside looked similar to Harper's medication, but not identical. They were slightly larger, less glossy. How had I not noticed the difference? The answer was simple. I hadn't expected anyone to tamper with my daughter's life-saving medication. Rebecca had been acting strangely calm during the emergency. Too calm. And she'd mentioned checking Harper's pill case, something I hadn't asked her to do. When Rebecca and my mother arrived at the hospital that evening, I watched my sister carefully. She expressed appropriate concern, asked the right questions, but something in her demeanor felt rehearsed. "The doctors say it looks like she hasn't been taking her medication," I said, studying Rebecca's face. A flicker of something guilt? Anxiety crossed her features before she composed herself. "That's strange. Maybe she's been pretending to take it? You know how kids can be about medication." "Harper has never missed a dose willingly," I countered. "She understands how important it is." "Well, something must have happened," my mother interjected. "Medications don't just disappear from the bloodstream." I waited until my mother left to use the restroom before confronting Rebecca directly. "You checked her pill case backstage," I said quietly. "What did you do?" "What are you talking about?" Rebecca replied, but her voice wavered slightly. Harper's pills were replaced with something else. The doctor confirmed it. They look similar, but they're not her medication. Rebecca's face paled. Megan, you can't possibly think. Tell me the truth, I demanded, my voice low but intense. Did you tamper with Harper's medication? I was trying to help, Rebecca finally whispered, glancing toward the door to make sure our mother wasn't returning yet. Harper needed to learn that she's not invincible, that her talent doesn't make her special. The admission hit me like a physical blow. You replaced her medication? With what? Just sugar pills, Rebecca said defensively. From the health food store. They look almost the same. It was only supposed to be for one day, just enough to make her performance less than perfect. To teach her humility. I was going to switch them back afterward. She could have died, I hissed, fury rising in me like a tidal wave. Do you understand that? Her condition isn't a joke. It's not a teaching tool. Don't be so dramatic, Rebecca scoffed, though her confidence seemed to be faltering. Sugar pills aren't dangerous. I researched it. You researched how to safely deny a child with an autoimmune condition her medication? I was nearly shouting now. What kind of research tells you that's okay? The door opened and my mother walked in, frowning at our obvious tension. What's going on? Tell her, I demanded, staring at Rebecca. Tell her what you did to Harper. Rebecca hesitated, then sighed. I might have switched Harper's medication with sugar pills. But it wasn't to hurt her. It was to teach her an important life lesson about humility. I expected my mother to be horrified. Instead, she looked between us with an expression of mild concern. Rebecca, that wasn't your place, she said, but her tone lacked any real admonishment. That's all you have to say? I asked incredulously. She tampered with Harper's medication. She caused a medical emergency. Harper collapsed on stage in front of hundreds of people, lost her chance at a scholarship, and could have suffered permanent damage. I'm sure Rebecca didn't mean any harm, my mother said, patting Rebecca's hand consolingly. She meant well. Meant well, I repeated, my voice rising. How does endangering a child's health ever mean well? You've always encouraged Harper's pride, Rebecca said, suddenly defensive again. Someone needed to show her that talent isn't everything. So you decided to risk her life to prove a point? I was shaking with rage now. Get out. Both of you, get out of this room right now before I call security. You're overreacting, my mother began, but I cut her off. My daughter is in a hospital bed because Rebecca decided to play God with her medication. I'm not overreacting. Now get out. My shouting attracted a nurse, who entered the room with a concerned expression. Is everything okay in here? No, I said firmly. These people need to leave. They're not welcome near my daughter. As Rebecca and my mother were escorted out, my ex-husband Brian arrived, having driven 3 hours after receiving my call. His face drained of color when I explained what had happened. Rebecca did what? He asked, disbelief evident in his voice. That's criminal. We need to report this. The hospital staff had already alerted Child Protective Services, as they were mandated to do in cases of suspected child endangerment. A social worker named Lisa came to speak with me that evening, taking detailed notes about the incident. This is a serious situation, Lisa explained gently. Tampering with a child's medication constitutes child endangerment, possibly even assault. You have the right to press charges. The reality of the situation crashed down on me. My own sister had deliberately endangered my child out of jealousy and some twisted sense of moral authority. And my mother had defended her actions. The family I'd grown up with, despite all our differences, was not the family I thought they were. That night, as I watched Harper sleeping, her color slowly returning to normal as the proper medication did its work, I made a decision. Family loyalty had its limits. And those limits ended where Harper's safety began. Harper was released from the hospital after 2 days of observation. The doctors assured me that she would make a full physical recovery with no lasting damage to her organs. The emotional damage, however, was immediately apparent. "I don't want to play piano anymore," she told me on the drive home, her voice flat. "I don't even want to think about music." "Harper, what happened wasn't your fault," I said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "It had nothing to do with your talent or your performance." "It doesn't matter," she replied, staring out the window. "Everyone saw me fail. And Aunt Rebecca was right. I was too confident." Her words broke my heart. Rebecca had not only endangered Harper's physical health, but had also poisoned her mind against her own abilities. The fallout from the incident spread quickly. I filed a restraining order against Rebecca and my mother, prohibiting them from contacting Harper or coming near our home. Rebecca initially tried to downplay what she'd done, texting mutual friends that I was blowing things out of proportion and that she'd only been trying to help Harper develop character. But when the hospital filed their mandatory report and the police became involved, the reality of her actions became impossible to ignore. Rebecca was placed on administrative leave from her law firm pending investigation. The local news picked up the story. They didn't name Harper, referring to her only as a minor, but they detailed how a local attorney had been accused of tampering with a child's medication. The social media storm was immediate and intense. People who knew us took sides. To my shock, many defended Rebecca, suggesting that tough love was sometimes necessary and that I was criminalizing a family dispute. Others were firmly in our corner, horrified by what Rebecca had done. My mother led the charge in Rebecca's defense, calling family members to rally support. Rebecca made a mistaken judgment, she told anyone who would listen. But Megan is destroying the family by involving the authorities. Harper withdrew into herself. She refused to return to school immediately, fearful of facing questions about her collapse at the recital. The piano in our living room remained untouched. She jumped at unexpected sounds and had trouble sleeping. The school counselor suggested she might be experiencing PTSD from the incident. Children who experience medical emergencies often develop anxiety, the counselor explained during our meeting. But in Harper's case, it's compounded by the betrayal of a trusted family member. She's questioning everything she thought was safe. 2 weeks after the incident, I received a call from Detective Laura Morgan, who had been assigned to our case. "Ms. Wilson, we've completed our investigation," she informed me. "The district attorney is prepared to charge your sister with child endangerment, reckless endangerment, and assault. Before proceeding, they wanted me to confirm that you wish to move forward with prosecution." It was the question I'd been dreading. Despite everything, Rebecca was still my sister. We'd shared a childhood, a history. But when I looked at Harper, who now checked her medication obsessively before taking it and had panic attacks at the mention of performing, the decision was clear. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want to proceed." The news that Rebecca would face criminal charges sent shockwaves through our extended family. My Uncle Robert called, pleading with me to reconsider. "Family problems should stay within the family," he insisted. "Think about what this will do to your mother. What about what it did to Harper?" I countered. "What about her career, her confidence, her sense of safety? Children are resilient," he replied dismissively. "But family relationships, once broken, may never heal." It became clear that many in my family valued the appearance of unity over actual justice or Harper's well-being. The divide grew wider when Derek, Rebecca's husband, filed for divorce. He reached out to me privately, expressing his horror at what Rebecca had done. "I had no idea she was capable of something like this," he confessed during a coffee meeting. "She's always been competitive, but this crosses every line. I can't stay married to someone who would endanger a child." Derek's support was unexpected but welcome. He offered to testify about Rebecca's increasing fixation on Harper's success in the months leading up to the recital. "She would come home from family gatherings and rant about how you were creating a monster by encouraging Harper's talent," he revealed. "I thought it was just typical family jealousy. I never imagined she'd act on it." My mother organized a family intervention at her house, ostensibly to heal the rift between Rebecca and me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to attend, leaving Harper with a trusted friend. The meeting was a disaster from the start. Rather than addressing Rebecca's actions, my family members took turns explaining why I needed to forgive and forget. My cousin Stephanie suggested that Harper had probably learned her lesson about pride, and we should all move forward. My Aunt Patricia implied that pressing charges showed I was vindictive rather than concerned for Harper's welfare. Rebecca sat silently through most of it, occasionally dabbing at tears that seemed to appear on cue. When she finally spoke, her words were carefully crafted to accept minimal responsibility while maximizing sympathy. "I made a terrible error in judgment," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt Harper. I was trying to teach an important life lesson, and I went about it the wrong way. But Megan, destroying my career and our family over this mistake is going too far." I looked around the room at the faces of my relatives, people who had known Harper her entire life, who had attended her recitals and birthday parties, and saw that most of them agreed with Rebecca. They viewed her actions as misguided, but essentially well-intentioned. They couldn't or wouldn't understand the severity of what she'd done. "Harper could have died," I said quietly. "If she hadn't received medical attention quickly, she could have gone into organ failure. This wasn't a mistake or a life lesson. It was a deliberate act that endangered my child's life because Rebecca couldn't stand to see her succeed." "Now you're just being melodramatic," my mother interrupted. "The doctor said she was never in any real danger." "That's not what the doctor said," I replied, anger rising. "The doctor said we got her to the hospital in time to prevent serious complications. There's a difference." The intervention ended with my mother delivering an ultimatum. Either I dropped the charges against Rebecca, or I would no longer be welcome in the family. I stood, gathering my coat. If protecting Harper means losing this family, then it's not a family worth having. As I walked out the door, I realized I was choosing my daughter over the family I'd been born into. It was both the easiest and the hardest decision I'd ever made. The legal process moved forward with grinding slowness. Harper and I met with the district attorney, Grace Bennett, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in cases involving child endangerment. "The evidence is quite clear," Grace explained during our first meeting. "We have the hospital tests showing the medication was replaced with glucose tablets. We have your sister's admission to hospital staff. And we have the expert testimony about the potential consequences of withholding this specific medication." Harper sat beside me, fidgeting nervously with the hem of her shirt. She'd lost weight since the incident, and dark circles shadowed her eyes from ongoing sleep troubles. "Will I have to talk in court?" she asked in a small voice. "In front of Aunt Rebecca?" Grace's expression softened. "We'll do everything possible to avoid that, Harper. Your mother's testimony, the medical evidence, and your aunt's own statements should be sufficient." Harper's healing process was slow and uneven. She began seeing Dr. Samantha Taylor, a therapist specializing in childhood trauma. Initially resistant, Harper gradually opened up about her feelings of betrayal and fear. "The hardest part," Dr. Taylor told me during a parent consultation, "is that Harper is questioning her own talents and accomplishments. She's internalized the idea that her confidence was somehow wrong or deserved punishment." We worked together to rebuild Harper's sense of security. I installed new locks on our doors and gave Harper complete control over her medication while still supervising discreetly. I rearranged my work schedule to be home more often. Small steps toward normalcy. 3 months after the incident, an unexpected ally emerged. Derek, now separated from Rebecca and living in an apartment across town, reached out with an offer to help our case. He had documented evidence of Rebecca's escalating fixation on Harper's success. "She kept a journal," he explained when we met with Grace Bennett. "After I moved out, I found it while collecting my things." She wrote extensively about her plans to teach Harper humility and her resentment of your parenting style. The journal was damning evidence. Rebecca had methodically planned the medication swap, researching how long it would take for symptoms to appear and calculating that it would affect Harper's performance without causing serious harm. She'd written about feeling vindicated when imagining Harper struggling on stage. Dr. Mitchell, Harper's specialist, provided expert testimony about the potential consequences of the medication tampering. With this particular condition and medication, he stated in his affidavit, even a 24-hour interruption can trigger a cascade of inflammatory responses. In severe cases, this could lead to organ damage or even failure. The patient was fortunate to receive intervention when she did. Faced with the mounting evidence, Rebecca's attorney advised her to accept a plea deal. She would plead guilty to child endangerment in exchange for a suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and community service. She would also lose her license to practice law for at least 5 years. It wasn't the punishment I'd expected. Part of me had wanted Rebecca to face jail time for what she'd done, but Grace explained that it was a significant consequence for a first-time offender with no previous criminal history. This will follow her for life, Grace assured me. The conviction alone will prevent her from working with children or vulnerable populations. And the loss of her law license is a substantial professional penalty. I discussed the plea deal with Harper, wanting her to feel some agency in the process. What do you think, sweetie? Is this enough? Harper considered the question seriously. Will she have to say she did it? In court? So everyone knows it wasn't my fault. Yes, I confirmed. She'll have to admit guilt publicly. Harper nodded. Then it's enough. The day Rebecca entered her guilty plea, Harper chose not to attend court. Instead, she asked to visit Ms. Julia, her piano teacher, for the first time since the recital. I saw it as a positive sign. Perhaps she was ready to reconnect with music. When I arrived home that evening, I found my mother sitting on our front steps. My first instinct was to ask her to leave, but something in her posture, defeated, smaller somehow, made me pause. I watched the news, she said without preamble. I saw Rebecca admit what she did. Heard her say the words out loud. Her voice cracked. How could she do that to Harper? To a child. It was the first time my mother had acknowledged the true nature of what Rebecca had done. The reality had finally broken through her denial. I enabled her, my mother continued, tears streaming down her face. All her life, I excused her behavior, her competitiveness. I taught her that winning mattered more than how you won. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with genuine remorse. I failed both my daughters. And I failed Harper. The apology was unexpected and imperfect, but it felt genuine. I didn't invite her inside, we weren't ready for that, but I did sit beside her on the steps as she cried for what our family had become and her role in creating it. I'd like to try to make amends, she said eventually. Not now, not right away. But someday, when Harper is ready, if she's ever ready. I'd like the chance. That will be Harper's decision, I told her firmly. And it might never happen. You need to accept that possibility. She nodded, gathering her purse and standing. I understand. Just tell her I'm sorry. Truly sorry. As she walked to her car, I realized that some relationships might eventually heal, albeit with permanent scars. Others, like my relationship with Rebecca, were broken beyond repair. Inside, I found Harper sitting at the piano, not playing but running her fingers lightly over the keys. When she saw me, she asked, "Was that Grandma?" Yes, I answered honestly. She wanted to apologize. Harper nodded thoughtfully. Miss Julia says I should try playing again. Not for anyone else. Just for me. What do you think about that? I asked. I think. She pressed a single key, listening to the note ring out. I think maybe music doesn't belong to what happened. It was mine before, and it can be mine again. It was the first moment I truly believed Harper would find her way back, not to who she had been before, but to someone new, someone stronger. 6 months after the recital that changed everything, Harper and I settled into a new apartment across town. The fresh start was therapeutic for both of us, no memories embedded in the walls, no associations with Rebecca or the events that had transpired. Here, we could build something new. Harper's health had stabilized. Her medication routine was firmly reestablished, and Dr. Mitchell reported that her inflammatory markers had returned to normal levels. The physical recovery had been straightforward compared to the emotional one, but there too, we were seeing progress. "I think I'm ready to try a small performance," Harper announced one evening as we ate dinner at our new kitchen table. "Nothing big. Maybe just at school or something." I tried to contain my excitement, not wanting to pressure her. "That sounds great, if you're sure." Miss Julia mentioned that the community center is having a casual music night next month. Harper nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that?" It's not like Berkeley. There's no pressure. The journey back to music had been gradual. It began with Harper listening to recordings of her favorite pianists. Then, tentative improvisations when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Eventually, structured practice returned to her daily routine, though now it was on her terms, no competitions, no pressure to achieve external validation. Our family dynamics had shifted permanently. I maintained minimal contact with my mother, accepting occasional phone calls but establishing firm boundaries. Rebecca, as part of her plea agreement, was not permitted any contact with Harper. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Chicago after her divorce was finalized, starting over where her reputation hadn't preceded her. In an unexpected development, I'd formed a support group for parents of children with chronic conditions. What began as casual conversations with other parents in doctors' waiting rooms evolved into regular meetings at the local library. We shared resources, vented frustrations, and celebrated victories, both small and large. "You've created something important here," Amanda, a mother whose son had juvenile diabetes, told me after one meeting. "You took something horrible and made it meaningful." Her words resonated with me. The trauma we'd experienced had changed us, but it hadn't defined us. We were building something new from the wreckage. One afternoon, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The return address was Chicago, and I immediately recognized Rebecca's handwriting. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened, but curiosity prevailed. The letter was surprisingly thoughtful, lacking the defensiveness that had characterized Rebecca's previous attempts at communication. She wrote about her therapy, her recognition of the patterns of jealousy and control that had dominated her relationships, and her genuine remorse for what she'd done to Harper. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote near the end. "I don't deserve it. But I want you both to know that I understand now the gravity of what I did, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be better." I didn't share the letter with Harper immediately, unsure if it would help or harm her healing process. When I mentioned it during her next therapy session, Dr. Taylor suggested leaving the decision up to Harper. "She may want to read it, or she may not," Dr. Taylor explained. But giving her the choice returned some control to her in this situation. When presented with the option, Harper decided she wasn't ready to read the letter, but asked me to keep it in case she changed her mind in the future. Her response reflected a new wisdom beyond her years. An understanding that healing follows its own timeline, not anyone else's expectations. My mother's attempts at reconciliation were more persistent. She called weekly, sent cards on holidays, and even attended one of Harper's school orchestra performances, where Harper played violin, having expanded her musical interests. She maintained a respectful distance, never approaching unless invited. After one such performance, Harper surprised me by saying, "I think I want to talk to Grandma." Just for a few minutes. Their conversation was brief but significant. Eleanor apologized directly to Harper without excuses or qualifications. Harper listened sullenly, then said simply, "I'm not ready to trust you yet, but maybe someday." As we drove home, Harper articulated a profound truth. Some people shouldn't be in our lives, even if they're family. But that doesn't mean we have to hate them forever. My advocacy work expanded beyond our support group. I began speaking at medical conferences about medication safety and the importance of believing children about their symptoms. Harper's story, shared with her permission and with identifying details changed, became a powerful teaching tool for healthcare providers. When the community center music night arrived, Harper chose to perform a piece she'd composed herself rather than classical repertoire. Titled After the Storm, it incorporated elements of both her classical training and more contemporary influences. She played with a different kind of confidence than before, not the exuberance of a child prodigy, but the assured touch of someone who played for herself first and foremost. The audience was small, perhaps 30 people in the community center's multi-purpose room. No talent scouts, no scholarship committees, no pressure. Just people gathered to appreciate music in its purest form. When Harper finished her piece, the applause was warm and genuine. The smile that spread across her face was the most authentic I'd seen in months. Later that night, as I tucked her into bed, a ritual she'd recently declared herself too old for but still secretly enjoyed, Harper said, "Mom, I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetie?" "What happened with Aunt Rebecca was terrible. But I learned something important from it." I tensed slightly, worried about what lesson she might have internalized. "What did you learn?" "That being good at something isn't wrong. Being proud of yourself isn't wrong. The wrong thing was what she did, not who I am." Tears sprang to my eyes as I hugged her tightly. This was the healing I'd hoped for, not forgetting or minimizing what had happened, but integrating it into a stronger sense of self. In the years since that terrible day at Berkeley, we'd rebuilt our lives piece by piece. We'd learned that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, respect, and safety. We'd discovered strength we didn't know we possessed. And most importantly, we'd found our voices, both Harper's musical voice and my advocacy voice. As I reflect on our journey, I realize that the truest measure of healing isn't returning to who you were before trauma. It's growing into someone new, someone who carries the scars but isn't defined by them. Harper will never be the same carefree prodigy she was before Rebecca's betrayal, but the young musician she's becoming has a depth and authenticity that comes only from overcoming real adversity. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting someone you love? What would you have done in my situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If our story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and recovery. And remember, true family is defined by love and safety, not by blood alone. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to protect what matters most in your own life.